That's yes, that's exactly what it was. It was that, and it was just so different. That was the part that was so weird is, you see Tinkerbell, and they had Tinkerbell always moving around like a moth or a butterfly. And this was completely alien to that. This was very deliberate. It was definitely traveling from one point to another. And it was just traveling in this straight line into the trees. And I had never seen anything like it. It was just amazing. And I walked down farther to try to see if I could spot anything up in the trees, but there wasn't. It just sort of disappeared into the trees. And it was just amazing. It was just amazing.
Yes, and many children see them too. About 75% of the world's children today are being born with etheric vision. And when your children talk with people and have daydream playmates, the chances are they are actually speaking to some of these people, because these angels or angelic forces, or nature spirits as they're often called, will often make themselves seen.
Whatever it is, it looks every bit like a fairy and very little like anything else.
But seriously, it kind of looks like a fairy. It just kind of doesn't look like your standard moth.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
But I wasn't going to make this video until I looked a little bit closer and I realized after it lands behind my bench, it disappears. And it just vanishes. And in fact, I went outside to look, to try to find it, to see if it was trash, to see if it was a bug, to see if it was a leaf, like trying to figure out what it could be, and it was gone. It just vanished.
What's that? Yeah. What's what? Yeah, look. Right up there. Insect or something.
Is that an insect? Let's have a look. What is it?
I don't know. Oh my god!
Ugh.
What happens to people who cut down fairy films?
Did you see it? Huh? Did you see it?
Yeah, me and him saw it.
What'd you see?
It was like a big creature.
A big creature?
Yeah, like around 10 feet tall.
I'm not going to BS you guys. One of my partners said they saw something fall out of the sky too, so that's why I'm kind of curious. Did you see anything land in your backyard?
The paranormal is real. Is it? The paranormal is real.
Welcome tonight, everybody, to Fascinating Fae. Tonight, we're very fortunate to be joined by Susan. And actually, Susan, I usually ask my guests where they're from before I start, but I realize I forgot to ask you where you're from. So can you just tell me the state that you're calling from today, please?
Kentucky.
Kentucky. Incredibly cool. I've actually never had a caller from Kentucky or been to Kentucky myself.
That's where I've lived for 20 years.
Understood. Well, listen, can you say a warm Kentucky welcome to the listeners tonight, and then I'll just move on with my intro as normal.
Well, I can't do the accent, but I'm welcoming everyone to this podcast, and I'm excited to be here.
I couldn't have done it better myself. Thank you so much. So, As I would normally start, I'll kind of proceed here. We are very lucky tonight to be welcoming Susan from Kentucky to the show. Susan was very kind to reach out to me and let me know she's had some experiences with a fairy, in particular, a fairy she saw while having a sleep in her car on a very hot night, a night too hot to spend inside. And so what we're going to do here tonight, Linda, is just remind you, as I do with most of my guests at the top of the show, this podcast is not able to, it's not here to, the purpose of this podcast is not to convince anybody listening of anything. You're not here to convince me of anything. We're here to just share our stories, get into our speculations if necessary, because the things we're trying to describe are sometimes very difficult to put into words. And so, with that said, what I'd like to ask is if you would be so kind, Susan, just to walk myself, the audience into your encounter. What I mean by that is just some context is usually really helpful. So what was going on prior to your encounter is usually important. What happened that day? If you can tell the audience where you were when this happened, what year, what time of year, that kind of stuff. Just lead us in, walk us in, and then just tell us what happened. If you could, please tell us about your sighting and your encounter with a fairy.
Okay, so I live in a rural area south of Lexington, Kentucky, which is in the bluegrass. And the house was built in 1897. It's a little farmhouse. The former owner called it a farmette. And I have a huge cow farm, or cattle farm, I should say, across the street from me. And south of me, west of me, are more pastures. And I have an abandoned house to the north of me. But I have about 2 acres. One is a little pasture, and the rest is my yard. So it's quite rural, although we now have a subdivision encroaching. But it's a very nice piece of property, and lots of birds and lots of nature and cows across the street. So this particular spring was 2017, and I was having a issue with my electricity. We'd had a storm, and the power went out, and then it didn't come on, and that's quite unusual. So I went into my breaker box and I was trying to see if I could get it back on, and nothing was working. And then I did something unfortunate. I pulled the whole house breaker offline. And when you try to put that back on, I did not know this, but it's almost impossible. And so all of a sudden we had this really warm weather, and it was very hot, and my AC was out. And since I am in a rural area, I just thought I'm going to go out and put the seat back in the van and put the moonroof out. And I put the collies in the car with me, and I thought, we'll just sleep out here tonight. It's cooler and it's pretty, and the stars were all out. So that was the setting. I had the van parked on the hill in my driveway, and I was listening to music. And then, I don't know, I decided to go star watching, I guess. So I got out and I started walking down my hill of my driveway, and there had been planes flying back and forth because the Lexington airport isn't that far from me. And so I see them on their inbound flights. And that is coming in directly to they'd be coming out of the southeast, and I'd be looking due east because I face due east. And so I know the difference between planes and other objects in the sky. I have had experience with those too. And all of a sudden, I saw this luminescent green object, probably about 25 feet above the ground, 20, 25 feet. And it was heading from north to south. It wasn't going very fast. So I had time to walk down the driveway a little ways. And it was a fairy of some sort. I I I know what Luna moths are. I know what their wings do. I mean, it was not a Luna moth. It was I don't know, maybe 8 inches, 6 to 8 inches long, and probably 4 inches high. And it was just traveling in this straight line into the trees. And I had never seen anything like it. It was just amazing. And I walked down farther to try to see if I could spot anything up in the trees, but there wasn't. It just sort of disappeared into the trees. And it was just amazing. It was just amazing. This is not this was not my first experience with seeing the other crowd here on the farm, or evidence of, I should say. Um, when I first bought the house in 2004, shortly after that, a fairy ring popped up at the end of my porch, and I had to go through it every day, but I always had metal on. Very seldom do I go through it without having some metal on me. And that was pretty surprising. And then I built a fairy garden, a large fairy raised bed fairy garden out behind my house. And I never really saw any evidence of anything in that garden or any area around it. But last year, I was cleaning out some stuff out of my house, and I had a bag of leeks. I think they were leeks, or yeah, I think they were leeks. And I don't know my state of mind, but I just took the bag and threw it into my other raised bed, which is an herb garden. And it was just laying there, and I thought, I'll go out and take care of that later. And the next morning, I went out, and I was just sort of looking over into the garden. I mean, it's literally right next to it's on a little deck right off the back of my back door. And I happened to look over, and the leeks were out of the bag, and planted upright.
Wow.
Yeah. I like it. And at this point, I have no neighbors anywhere. No, there's nobody. The house below me is empty, has been empty for years. It's maintained, but it's empty. And the house north of me, people got evicted, and then new people bought the property, and they put a gate across so nobody could get in there. So I mean, there's just nobody here.
May I ask an obvious question? It is just yourself at the farm.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think the collie was out there. He probably wouldn't have eaten it, although he'd been known to eat daffodils. But um, I don't think he would have eaten anything that was onion. And it actually has a gate. It's an enclosed, fenced-in area, so he couldn't have gotten in there at that point.
Susan, thank you so much for adding the additional detail about the fairy ring and your mention of metal. Additionally, thank you for your story about these leaks. Both of these stories are equally, in and of themselves, worth further discussion. And so for that reason, I will get back to them. What I would like to do, and I do apologize sincerely, as I feel that I accidentally interrupted you earlier, as you were sort of talking towards the end of your illuminated light green fairy sighting, which is where I was attempting to jump in to ask some questions at that point. So I do apologize, and thank you again for proceeding past my interruption there. I do apologize. If I may, could I ask you some questions about each of these three stories you've told me?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so back to the fairy sighting. Now, I'm not familiar with Kentucky insect populations, but a luna moth, could you just maybe briefly describe to the best of your ability the size of a luna moth and why you're saying this is not a luna moth?
A luna moth can be pretty large. I mean, they can get pretty large. They can get probably, I think, 4 inches or 5 inches. They can get pretty large. But the way the wings were on this, it wasn't the way a moth would fly.
Okay, so actually that was going to be one of my follow-up questions, and you've given me a really...
It was a very straight, it was a very straight flight. It was a very straight flight. And it wasn't where a moth is usually, I don't know how you want to describe it, wavy or undulating.
They're janky. They're like
Yeah,
over here, over there. They're not like precise.
this was not like that.
Can I ask you, let's just dig into the, I'll call it trajectory for lack of a better word, but like the way they are actually moving in a line. Because people who describe fairies in flight describe a difficult to describe kind of motion. And I think you've touched on this a little bit by saying it was flying in a straight line. You've also indicated like, you know how a moth flies. I think everybody also can think about in their head how a fly flies or even how a hummingbird flies. There's nothing. So like one of the things that I'd like you to just elaborate on, if you could, in your own words, is anything around what the visual aspect of looking at it moving is like, if you could, please.
That was the part that was so weird is, you see Tinkerbell, and they had Tinkerbell always moving around like a moth or a butterfly. And this was completely alien to that. This was very deliberate. It was definitely traveling from one point to another. And it was not a plane. It wasn't that far, into the sky beyond. Um, it was just a very calm night. It was clear. Like I said, it had been very humid in the house. The house tends to stay humid if it doesn't have AC. And but it was a pleasant night outside, and this just kind of came across and just very calmly moved down into the trees. And I have maple and Osage orange down there. Um, Primarily, what that is at that height. I have a sycamore across from where it was coming. Um, and then I have a hedgerow between my pasture and the pasture to the south of me, which would have been quite a bit lower. But it's very much the edge, the borderlands, and that's I consider myself a hedge witch, and so I have hedges all the way around my property that are natural. And this was heading, of course, at tree top, not at treetop level, but like I said, around because these trees down there are very old and very tall. Um, so it was headed from my yard on the other side into this hedgerow area. There's a lot of honeysuckle underneath. The understory is honeysuckle and mock orange, um, pretty much honeysuckle. There's poison ivy down at the ground level, but it's definitely a wilder area.
It's really interesting how you're describing the motion, and I think you've done a good job. I spoke with a firefighter from Oregon not that long ago, and he saw one indoors, and he's describing a really similar thing to what you're describing. If I may, could I share some of the ways that he was talking and see if it resonates with you? What he was saying is, he's like, when you watch a bug move, even if it's a really precise bug like a dragonfly, when it's moving, it still has some up and down and some bob to it.
Right.
But when you look at these things move, it's like super straight. It's like a laser pointer on a machine.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. And it was just so different.
Mm-hmm. It is what can be what catches your eye about one of these things, for sure.
And people that haven't experienced this, I would mention it, and they were just like, "Oh, it was a plane," and I said, "No, it wasn't a plane." I said, "This wasn't way over in the distance." I said, "It was in my driveway, over my driveway."
Susan, people that have really seen a flying fairy are getting increasingly easy for me to identify for a few key reasons. One, they always have their eye caught by a couple of aspects of it. Usually it's one of something related to it itself. So I'll either say like it's a weird color, it's a weird shape, it's in a weird position, etc. So something about the thing itself will catch the eye. It's illuminated, etc. Yeah. But correspondingly, once the oddness or once the unusualness of the thing itself is registered, the immediate follow-up that is always corresponding is the way that it moves.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not the only person to be able to sort of confirm and independently describe this movement unprompted. And so I want to just affirm that for you.
Yeah, this is not like an orb. People always talk about seeing these orbs. This was not like an orb at all. This definitely had a body part, and then the wing part was vertical, and they were not moving. That was the other thing, is they were not moving like towards me, or maybe they were moving towards me. I couldn't tell, but they were not moving. I can't explain it. It wasn't like a butterfly. I just, after watching everything that you see on animation and everything, that's what I expected, and this was not that at all.
You're doing a really amazing job, honestly, here, Susan, of putting voice to something that is extremely difficult to put voice to. Further to that, I don't like to talk about my experience very much during interviews that belong to the other party, which is you here. You're the guest that everyone's tuned in to listen to, not me. But I just want to sort of elaborate and build on what you're saying. So first of all, if I were to describe my own experience in detail, which I didn't do for you yet personally, Susan, but if I were to do that here right now, I would sound in an identical way to you. A little bit hard to get the words right, but definitely trying to say, I saw something that caught my eye. I know what being outdoors is. Okay, I saw this. It was unusual. That's why I'm trying to tell you about it. I would sound very much the same way. And I have a lot of empathy for you, for all of my guests, all of whom I believe are very credible, telling the truth. And so I just want to first share that thought and say thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. It's difficult and it takes a degree of bravery to, accept a message from a guy on Facebook saying, hey, can I please interview you about your fairy encounter? So, you deserve some credit for taking the time for myself and for the audience to share so deeply, share so completely. Sometimes I ask a question about something that was just described to me over again a few times. I don't do that because I'm challenging you. I do it because fairies are very difficult to describe. And the way I want to sort of finish up here is like, you said a second ago that, you're expecting Tinkerbell and cartoons because that's how you see it. And I think there's a lot of representations of fairies out there that do this trick. The representation of fairy, like Tinkerbell, occupies the space in the mind of the person who hears the word fairy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I come out with my podcast promotions and I'm like on Facebook or Reddit and I'm like, hey, fairies are real, the person who reads that immediately thinks of Tinkerbell and thinks I'm a bleeping lunatic. But what you are talking about and what I am talking about, what the guests are talking about on this show are modern day, the 2000s, the 2020s, the 2010s, today, not long ago in history, in myth, and in folklore. We're talking about present day, currently still occurring phenomena. And the hallmarks of it are strange motion, strange appearance. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that comes along with it, including strange, like emotional feelings. And I want to ask you a few more questions if I can. But I just want to say, you're starting off extremely strong with regards to me as the person doing the objective job of bringing real guests who have seen real fairies to the show. I kind of want to just finish by saying, I think there's sort of like an interdimensional, or they're earthbound, as a guest who I will get to a little bit later on has explained to me, who's got some deep knowledge of fairies. They're here. They're not like from outer space. They're not from elsewhere. But they are like a type of individual spirit that is moving around with, as much as anything, their mind as what is propelling them as their physical self. And this is why their motion is so strange to observe. Because they are moving physically in front of you, but they're moving in a way that doesn't really feel like other physical things moving that you have witnessed your entire life. And we all know what stuff moving looks like because we have eyes and we deal with moving stuff every single day of our lives, driving, catching stuff, whatever. It's like there's movement as part of our perceptive capabilities baked in. And when something is moving strangely, you don't have to be a trained observer. You don't have to be a scientist. You just know it when you see it. So can I please...
Can I jump in here on you now? Okay. So just to give you a little background, my undergraduate degree is in geology. And I was a research librarian at the University of Kentucky. And I just retired last fall. So I have a very strong sense of science. But I also believe there are things that we don't know about and we're learning about every day. Yesterday I saw an article about a skeleton that was discovered in Japan in an archaeological dig, and it looks just like a dragon. So there are things that we just aren't aware of. And I believe that you have to have an open mind. Because when you see things like this, it's very difficult to really stay in the moment and say, okay, I've got to look at this. What is this?
Susan, you've done a fantastic job there of putting a decent, really nice cherry on top of my ramblings. And I do apologize again for getting so speculative. And actually, that's a very good lesson to me, to the listener, and especially to me. I wasn't expecting what you just said as a person who's on a farm in Kentucky to leave your mouth. So you are a trained observer and a trained researcher and someone with a strong fundamental in science. Here I was mansplaining what I think, and I stand corrected, and I'm happy. I'm going to publish this for sure because it's a good reminder to me, and I'll listen to this again and again as I edit it. So thank you for that gracious segue. So if I may, with all that said, and if I may move us forward through the conversation with some more genuine curiosity about like body position, body shape, stuff like that, if I could, please.
Okay. This was at a distance, so I can't really. I think it was upright. It was in an upright position. They were. Guess I should say they. They, because I don't know what it was in an upright position. At one point I feel like it was something that was on something, and then other times I feel like it was an entity to itself. But I've never really resolved what that shape was. But the wings were upright, but there was a body in the middle of that.
When you say upright, you mean, just to be clear, like sort of the way that
like if you're sitting on a butterfly with its wings out straight, there's a body in the middle. But this had the wings vertical.
like at the back, like between the shoulder blades
Yeah.
kind of position.
But it wasn't. No, it wasn't. I can't explain it. It would be like if you were sitting on a winged horse. The wings would go out, but when I saw this, the wings were. Take my meds. Oh, sorry, hold on. Finish this. Alexa, end. Sorry. So in this position, it was like the wings were vertical, but then there was a longer body that was. I don't know. I'm having a hard time describing it because it was. I didn't know what I was seeing, and it was hard to. As I say, you're so stunned, and then you're trying to grasp what you're seeing. So all I can say is that it was in my opinion that it had wings and it had a body, but whether the body was part of the wings or there was this creature on whatever this was that was flying and moving, I couldn't tell. I guess that's the best way to explain it.
That's a really interesting and really well done distinction. Thanks for that. That's really cool.
I don't think it's too clear, but
I can kind of think about it, yeah. If I may, like I think you're sort of like if you were riding a horse, the wings aren't going to be where your legs are; they're going to be almost on the shoulder blades of the horse.
right. Yes, exactly. That's what I mean. It was a different. It was just so differently oriented than what I'd ever expected to see. And I also believe in fairies, or the other crowd, um, not necessarily being small. I don't. I never expected to see a diminutive sized um, entity or whatever you want to call these beings.
I think that's a very accurate intuition because I hear from guests who see foot tall, 4 foot tall, even bigger sometimes.
I mean, they can be our size. I mean, I believe they're shapeshifters, and that they could be. You don't even know if you met one.
I think you might even be right there too. And my journey of understanding started with seeing one very similar in the way you're describing. Mine was much faster, but we're talking about a similar thing. I think I have a different wing
But
type.
yours was in with a lot of people, right?
It was with another person, and that's
Were there other people around?
no. We
Oh,
were at anchor in this pristine bay
okay.
with basically, when I say pristine, this is a provincial park with no man-made structures. It's a nature preserve.
Okay.
So to be there to sleep at night, the only way to do it is at anchor in your boat in the
Right.
water. So we'd come in earlier in the day and we'd walked through the park, saw nobody except for an owl super close on the trail. That night, after the walk with the owl, is when this fairy came into the boat. To finish the thought, the only reason I'm doing this podcast probably is because I was with somebody who I know, love, and trust when it happened, and she and I experienced the exact same thing. So it was the weirdest thing I ever saw, much like you're trying to describe. And like I've seen stuff that would constitute orbs. I've seen stuff in the sky that's like, whoa, what's that? But this was way weirder, and like you're talking about, way weirder. And I think that you're right. I think that they're big sometimes. I also think that each and every one of them is an individual. And I think that they all take the shape that they want to as themselves. And that's when people see them most frequently, is when they're themselves. And I don't exactly know how they do it, but maybe it's something to do with the way that a person could potentially meditate and levitate or teleport themselves through the manipulation of consciousness. I think fairies are just way, way better at that concept and are doing it in front of us. And then that begs so many questions about the nature of reality. Can I just ask one final question about the green color? And then we'll move on, if we can, to hedge witchery, the fairy ring, and then finally, arguably one of the more fascinating subplots that someone has revealed to me, the leaks. So the green, just talk about the color just a little bit. I'll leave the mic open for you to get into the visual appearance of color.
Well, color and the movement were what really stood out at first, because I thought, what is that? And I have a lot of lightning bugs down here in the summer, so that's always fun to go out and look at the lightning bugs. I'm originally from Western New York, and our lightning bugs up there are not nearly as large as the ones here. I'd say they're double the size here. So I do like to be out there looking at the lightning bugs when they start coming out. But obviously this was a lot larger, and it was definitely a luminescent green. It wasn't like a bright chartreuse or a poison green. It was, I don't hate to say minty, but between a minty and an olive, I guess. It was and it was all illuminated. It wasn't just part of it. It was like this being going through the air from north to south. when you mentioned the owl, that's interesting because I've had screech owls down in that area in the Osage orange trees.
I'm gonna just do the thing I always say I don't like to do, but I'm just gonna throw out like one of these weird intuitions that keeps hitting me around owls. As I started this show, Susan, an owl appeared at the window. I talk about it in episode 3 a little bit, but like yesterday morning, I woke up and I just said out loud for no particular reason to no one at all. I was just like, owls are interdimensional birds.
Mm-hmm.
I totally finally got it. I was like, that's where they go at night. That's why they're out at night. Where are they during the day? Like, you know, we never see them. Like, I know wildlife photographers find them during the day. I know owls are real things, but so are fairies. I think that I think that owls might have that capacity to move through the realms like a fairy does.
Oh, definitely. When I was young, and we had a huge woods and pastures behind us. I was out birding one day. I knew there was something in this tree, and I kept looking, but I couldn't see it. And it was literally a branch of baby screech owls. And there were like 4 or 5 of them sitting in a row, and they were these tiny little things, and they were literally right in front of me, and I could not see them. Talk about not seeing the forest for the trees. And then all of a sudden, there they were. And I mean, I was literally a foot away from them. The branch was above me, but it was literally a foot away. And that was, yeah. And I mean, they were doing what they should have done, being very quiet, not moving to, protect themselves. But it was a shocking experience because I'm standing there and I'm like, there's something here. Boy, was I surprised when my eyes finally registered what I was seeing.
What's interesting about that is that it's similar to my encounter. The owl I saw in the woods is like on a low branch, like right at your face, just about.
Yeah.
Also right on the trail.
Yep, that's how this was. It was right on a trail.
Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, owl's a smart bird. It's a smart bird. It's a predatory bird. It has forward-facing eyes like a dog and a human. When it looks at you, it looks at you, right? It has stereo eyes. It's not a squirrel with eyes on either side of its head or a deer with eyes on either side of its head because it's a prey animal. It's a predator. So when it looks at you, it's like got an elevated level of consciousness to begin with.
Yep.
Point being, they can hear you coming. They're a wildlife animal. They should know to fly away.
Yeah.
They are capable of literally just picking up in the air and moving on with almost no effort because they have wings. And yet, I and you both are startled to just come across one, almost seemingly just appearing out of nowhere on a low branch right in front of our faces.
Yeah, I mean, I was still in high school, I think, at the time when that happened. And it's just I always think about that.
Could be a natural phenomena. They might just be patient and still and doing a freeze move as a defense mechanism. But it does beg the question, why are these birds, unlike other birds, not flying away when a human is coming anywhere close to them at all? Which is the natural behavior of pretty much every bird who's wild. So, okay, so hedge witchery is a new term to me. Also, the other folk, you are the first guest to refer to fairies by that term. And for guests who are more like coming to this because of my promotions and less of a traditional background, I think that's like a Celtic or like not even Celtic, but it's a way of referring to the Fae in general, I think. Is that right?
It's a term that Eddie Lenihan uses in Ireland. And if you've never read any of his books, I can send you some links. He's collected folk tales and fairy tales of the other crowd, as he calls them, the other folk, because tradition tells us that they don't really like to be called fairies. So, I try to not use that. It's very hard to not do that. But there's so many different names that they go by. But the wee folk, the she, that's probably one of the more common in Celtic terms. Um, I have to tell you that my own history in Irish and German fairy tales goes back to when I was born. My great aunt gave me a book of Grimm fairy tales when I was born. My grandmother's father was born, well, he lived in Northern Ireland, but the Hunter family came from Scotland originally. And she passed down her belief of fairies to her daughter, my mom, and then she to me. And I've studied fairies my entire life. So it's, to me, a very interesting area of research.
Well, not to plug the podcast, but the name of this show is Fascinating Fae for a reason. It's totally fascinating indeed.
Yes.
And actually, just to sort of amplify something you said, I wish there was another word for them too. From a humble podcaster who's a guy who previous to this never really gave fairies a second thought, to a professional researcher, could we just maybe agree that they're a non-taxonomically categorized form of energy being?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you, Susan, and I appreciate the professional confirmation of my layman's musings. Okay. Hedge witchery and a fairy ring. Also, before you do that, just a quick shout out to Alex, who's coming on with his own episode pretty soon. He's going by the name Fairy Finder and is the person who introduced me to the concept of fairy gardens. So, like, what's a hedge witch? What are fairy rings? What's a fairy garden in your view?
Wow, that's a lot of, that could be a whole topics by themselves in each episode. Hedge witch goes back to the days of the woman in the neighborhood who people turn to for medicines and for remedies, and they usually lived out of town, and that's where the hedges were between the fields, and so they became known as hedge wives or hedge witches, and that's where the term comes from. You'll often hear riding the hedge in a association with the hedge witch, and it's simply that a lot of berries and a lot of plants that would be used as medicinal cures or in salves. Those all came from like the elderberry in the United States, and also, of course, also over in Europe. But currants, all the different berries, blackberries, raspberries, a lot of these grew in the hedges, and so a lot of this was used. Wild roses and the rose hips often were gathered. All these plants grew in the hedges, so they were all used. Nothing went to waste. So that's sort of a quick and overview of the hedge witch. The fairy ring traditionally is the visible circle, and it can be other shapes, but traditional is the circle of wild mushrooms or toadstools, if you want to call them that, that spring up in the spring or in the summer, typically late summer maybe. And it's believed that it's a gateway or a portal to the realm of the Fae. You will often hear them referred to, the homes that they have underground are called brews or brewers. And our word burg comes from BRUH or BRUGH. So Pittsburgh or Leechburg or any Lynchburg, any town that has a burg, that actually goes back to that. The fairies space underneath would be known as a burg or a brew. And that's that space where they lived in the mountains underneath the fairy hills. So you often hear about the Elf King living on a fairy hill, or the mound underneath. Another traditional fairy ring could be a space where there's a fairy thorn, which would be the white thorn. There's white thorn and black thorn, and that's a whole other story between the different types of thorns. But typically in Ireland, if there was a white thorn or a black thorn, people did not bring those in. When they brought in the May, they would collect a branch from the thorn, and they'd hang it over the doorway outside, but it was never to be brought in. And that was because it was thought to be very bad luck, and that the fairies did not want that in the house. And then I could talk about the fairy raids too, and how the houses were built in Ireland. That's a whole other story. But that's where the fairy rings come from, are the mushrooms that spring up. And I do have a story of a friend of mine up in Ohio, and I saw this with my own eyes. She had two huge rings, one that was about 15 feet and one that was about 9 feet wide, that popped up one summer. And she lived a few miles from me, and she called me to come over one night for a fire, and she said, "I want you to see the fairy rings." And that was the first time I'd ever seen huge fairy rings like that. And she had 2 dogs at the time, and neither of the dogs would go across the fairy rings. They purposely went around the outsides. And she and her significant other at that point both were waiting to see if I would go into it. And I had brought a lot of metal with me because I thought I might. But when I saw those dogs consistently all through the evening detouring around these huge circles, I told her, I said, "I'm not going in it." I'd never seen anything like that.
Fascinating. I have a question about metal in a second. Before I do, just what you're saying about animals has come up numerous times. I do think that we are also animals, of course. Biology dictates that we share the same basic, evolutionary trajectory as many of the things around us. Dogs are pretty close. They're not obviously like a primate, but they're pretty close in terms of their faculties. And cats as well also seem to see the ethereal or the quantum, and it's really interesting. Like, dogs are not known for consistently avoiding huge swaths of their yard. They're pretty reckless. They're just like usually
right.
they get the zoomies even, and
Yeah.
so it's very interesting for you to observe that. And
We all watched it. Yeah, we were stunned.
and actually, I'll give Alex a double shout out. He was one of the first people to talk to me about his dogs perceiving fairy behavior in his home, where there was nothing visible to the naked eye, and then subsequently catching that on camera. And actually, an episode I have just put out about Linda follows the same pattern, where she sees something on camera but not with the naked eye. May I ask the significance of metal I'm getting the sense that it somehow protects you.
Iron is anathema to fairies. It can make them sick. It's their kryptonite, so to speak. And so if you carry any iron, not necessarily steel, but iron, I always try to make sure it's iron, but they say other metals work as well, but I usually have iron on me. That will protect you. You can also wear your jacket turned inside out, and there are other talismans that you can carry. But iron is easy and portable, and that's what I use. And just as a note on those two fairy rings, the dogs would not cross them until the mushrooms absolutely disappeared. It was several days.
Thank you for the distinction and the additional details around both hedge witchery, its interrelation to the history. Also, in the opening of this podcast, there's a really old clip from Irish BBC, and there's a man asking, what happens to people who cut down fairy thorns?
Oh, yeah.
And I'll let the audience follow the credits on my website. You can watch the full almost 45-minute documentary from the 1960s about when fairy fever was taking over the UK. It's really cool.
Well, I mean, in Ireland, there's places where they've built buildings. They've had to move roads and move buildings or not build buildings because they were on a fairy fort. And the townships just were like, mm-mm.
Don't want to mess with those nice guys. Don't want to mess with the other folk, as you say.
Right.
Yeah.
The other crowd.
The other crowd. I apologize. I think I need to research that a little bit better for the next time I refer to it. I'm still learning, as I go. And I'll be honest, I started off with no background knowledge in fairies from a myth or folklore perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Probably just something to do with my personality. It's the part I rejected the most on my way to justifying what I saw. I like it better as a quantum physics-y, non-taxonomically described energy being, of which there are many types on Earth.
Right.
But that's just my language. Folklore predates quantum detecting instruments. It predates even the telescope and microscope development to what we have today. So its wordage is probably language referring to the identical phenomena. I'm certain of this. And through the lens of the reteller of the experience, it took on this type of narrative. If you would allow, I think this podcast in its own way is starting to take on a bit of a narrative so I can understand how it happened. Everyone here on this show is talking in like modern terms, and a lexicon of verbiage is developing, but then back then it was the exact same thing. You've been really generous with your knowledge. You've been generous with your time so far. And for that reason, I would just like to really appreciate that. I also just really appreciate you. Not that I'm a hedge witch, but I did run cannabis dispensaries for 5 years after recovering from a serious rollover accident. And I do believe strongly in nature-based remedies, plant-based medicine, call it what you will. The remedy for what has hurt us is rooted in the world around us. The natural provision of what it has to offer is what can heal and transform us. Not to get too woo-woo, but it's true even on just a basic level, like just go outside, it's good for you, But on a deeper level, like we're discussing, the nature of reality and the nature of nature itself is so more nuanced and incredible than I think even a great, BBC documentary does justice, and those are great. But I mean, it's just fascinating that fairies are real, and you've really helped me broaden my understanding around the folklore aspect considerably. So I just really want to appreciate that again and say thank you for doing that for myself and for the audience listening.
Well, very welcome. And the only other thing I didn't touch on, I'll touch briefly, is that fairy gardens, I've had fairy gardens since the 90s. It's that in itself is a whole nother topic, because there's different types of fairy gardens. You can have I have a large raised bed right now, but I also make little tabletop ones. And I've seen some really lovely ones on Facebook now that are in terrariums. So people make all kinds of gardens, and the one thing that they always say when you make a fairy garden is to leave a little spot for the wild, as a wild area, because that's what will really attract them, and not make it too formalized.
Thanks for reminding me of the third grouped question that I had started off with. You're actually a much better listener than I am. It makes me think maybe I should have you and Alex on to do a whole separate episode on fairy gardens, because it actually was something he said too, that it needs its whole own episode. So maybe that'll actually happen here sometime soon. If we could, and again, with appreciation for your time, of which you've offered us so much, and so much of your excellent articulate communication and storytelling. Really just, I think you've done this whole topic an incredible service by allowing me to ask you all these questions and appearing here on Fascinating Fae tonight. So thank you again, Susan, for doing that. Last question, let's get into these leeks. Leeks don't plant themselves. Leeks don't plant themselves. No, they don't. I think earlier when you were talking about it, I was having a bit of a hard time following the bag toss into the garden. Could we take it from there with a bit more detail, if that's okay?
Okay. So it was really, I don't know. I was in a mood, and I just had this bag of onions or leeks or whatever. They were a big bulb, and they were going, and I just, instead of putting them in a bag to put out in the trash, for some reason I threw them over my railing into my herb garden, my raised herb garden, which is kind of a mess right now. But so they were just laying in the bag, and I thought, oh, when I go out later, I'll just go grab them. And I don't know why I threw them over there. It was the dumbest thing. It was a plastic bag. I no clue what I was doing. But the next morning, when I went out to let the dog out, they were out of the bag and they were in the ground, upright. Now, a squirrel and a groundhog, I mean, I posted this on Facebook and everybody was just like, whoa. None of them would do that. They might eat them, or a possum or something, or, throw them around or something, or drag it out of the bag, but they would not plant them.
No, they wouldn't. It's how planted, like, just give me a depth if you can remember.
Well, they were down in the ground. I mean, they're a couple inches.
Wow. Okay. That's a really interesting sort of thought to leave with, and I'll ask you one separate question outside of the leaks. But before I do, you're not the first person, and I feel like this is a weird part about fairy encounters too. You're not the first person to be like, I just did something unusual in that moment that I don't usually do, and I don't know why, I just did it. And then later, or actually like directly corresponding, that weird unexplicable choice of behavior out of character. Nothing huge usually. Like the firefighter I talked to was like, I was sitting looking at where stuff was burning, because that's where I was looking. And then I just felt like I needed to look over my left-hand shoulder, and I don't know why. And then he looked over his left-hand shoulder and he saw this very large butterfly, like considerably larger. And then he looked away, and then he was like, that wasn't, like, he was describing this in the interview. He's basically saying, oh, then I did something even weirder, which is I turned back around to look at it. And then I spoke out loud to it. And I won't ruin it for you, but after he speaks out loud to it, things get pretty intense pretty quickly.
Wow.
There's an intuition, there's a higher self component to being around a fairy. I have a guest, Frozen Wolf, coming on soon, who definitely was receiving some type of, like, you know, she was doing things that were a little out of character with an elf or gnome. I'm pretty sure a gnome, she's saying, in her home that had entered in off the forest after as a result of a forest fire near her home, seeking refuge. And she also describes, like, kind of just weird, intuitive, like, I don't normally do this, but I did it this day. So I just find that interesting. And I wonder if you have a benevolent force there that wanted to help you with getting those in the ground for some reason. And, you know, that may explain why you did something a little out of character. But one thing's for sure, you are a farmer. You're on a Kentucky farm. You know stuff doesn't plant itself.
Yeah.
And as you described earlier, no neighbors anywhere nearby. Also, neighbors are nice in Kentucky, I guess, probably. Like, they're nice everywhere to an extent, but they don't come around overnight.
Plant one bag of onions or
leave no note,
yeah.
And don't do anything else. Yeah.
I mean, it was just so strange. But it's, you know, it's typical of stuff that happens here.
Okay, so Susan, with all that said, with that incredible final story about the leeks being planted, how cool is that? If they could, you know, get some fairies working at Home Depot, you know, just plant your stuff overnight for you. I'm joking. We would never make them do that. They're way too special. But my question is basically as follows, and we have touched on this quite a bit. And I say touched on it, we've actually gone pretty deep on a lot of what I'm about to ask you. But what I would like to allow you to do, since you are so knowledgeable, experienced, you've seen one, you've seen a genuine one, you've got a lot to offer with regards to this question. I always preface this question by reminding everybody there is no right answer and there is no wrong answer. Effectively, no one is the authority on fairies. I'm not, you're not. It's not about that.
Eddie O'Lanahan might be.
You know, there's a few people that are emerging that I have to get on the show, I think, or otherwise engage with more deeply on my own research. What was the name of that person again, please?
Eddie, it's either O'Lanahan or I think it's Lenahan. Lenihan.
One of the things we'll do is you can send me any links and I'll add those to the website for the episode. So my question is, what do you think fairies are?
I believe that they're a race or a people just like we, but I think that their powers are different. I think they're more evolved or just different. And, you know, as you say, energy, they're something that can manifest in different ways. And I think they can use energy to achieve different things. I believe that there are all different types, because I believe there are some in my house. I've experienced things in the house, so I just think that they're in a different in a different realm, and they come in and out. And I do believe that dogs and cats can see them, just like I believe they can see spirits, because I watch my animals do that. Um, but I do think they're a different, like I say, a different energy or reality, and it's a different, it's just a different plane that they can go in and out of.
Susan, that's a really beautiful and beautifully worded answer. And I agree with just about everything you said there, in fact. I would add that I think dogs and cats do see them. Dogs and cats are enough like us that they're a little bit perturbed when they see them. I think also other animals see them, like birds and squirrels, and I think the birds and squirrels just see them all the time and don't even notice because they're just hanging out with them.
I think the wild animals do have that link, and I think the dogs and the cats do have it, but I don't think they understand it.
Doesn't that just remind you a little of us? We're domesticated enough that we have trouble understanding what we can actually see and experience. And it's confusing and sometimes a little scary to many of us.
Yep. But it's beautiful. It's beautiful if you can see it. I have another friend in Ohio, and she's seen many, many forms.
I believe, Susan, that it might even be possible through meditation practices or other positive, healthy practices to get your vision of the realm, even get some type of dialogue, if you would, for lack of a better word. I think all that's possible. And you really, have such a broad set of stories that are all occurring on a seemingly enchanted property, including, I think, not the least of which is your presence there, which is no coincidence whatsoever. And so I do really appreciate you. I appreciate your answer, all of your answers for that matter. You've been so gracious with me at times during this conversation as well. And for that, I sincerely do thank you in addition. As I move to let you go here tonight, what I usually do is I thank our guests. So, Susan, on behalf of all of our human and non-human listeners tuning into Fascinating Fae tonight, big thanks to Susan for coming on the show. Just a reminder to our guests who are listening, and in honor of Susan's courage, the sort of energy of which I believe will invite some more stories. I'd just like to remind everybody listening that if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, just shoot me an email. It's encounters@fascinatingfae.com. Fascinating Fae is my socials on pretty much all the social channels, and you can hit me up there if that's where you feel most comfortable. So Susan, with all that said, again, a really big thanks for being here on the show tonight. Great interview, great episode. I'm really looking forward to releasing this. This was unexpectedly awesome. So really appreciate you being here. And if you just want to say the last words to the audience, the mic is yours.
Well, I want to thank you for inviting me. This has been really exciting for me. And to anyone who's interested in the other crowd or the wee folk or however you perceive them, go forth and enjoy it, because it's unexpected and it's beautiful, and it's a little bit different, and that's what makes it so much fun.
After dark, when the light has left us, we'll be on the move tonight. Through the park, just the frozen people we leave behind these city lights. And as the sun comes up this hill, you don't know what you've been missing. After the daylight comes around, you do what you will, play your part and learn and listen, up until the day that you are found, when your daylight comes around. In the night, we crossed the open plains and reached the mountains by the day. Into the sea, we meet our ship's commander. We set our sails for far away, so far away. And as the sun comes up this hill, you don't know what you've been missing. After the daylight comes around, you do what you will, play your part and learn and listen, up until the day that you are found, when your daylight comes in.